The winter of 1994 pressed down on Coldwater County like a suffocating blanket. Snow clung to the edges of the rural highway, the kind that turned black from weeks of passing trucks. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, and silence draped itself over the fields in long, unbroken stretches. Only the hum of a lone patrol car disturbed the night. Deputy Mark Lawson sat behind the wheel, his fingers tight on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the endless road ahead. At 34, he was no rookie. He knew these backroads, every barn and rusted mailbox. But tonight, something about the stillness gnawed at him. He reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 37, he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of weariness. "Pulling over on County Road 12 for a routine check. White pickup on the shoulder, copy?" Static crackled, then a faint reply. "Copy that, 37. Advise once clear." Mark exhaled, set the cruiser's transmission into park, and flipped on his flashers. Red and blue light spilled across the snow, painting the fields with restless color. For a moment he sat still, watching the faint plume of his own breath fog the windshield. He rubbed his thumb over his wedding band, then pushed the door open. The cold slapped him instantly, searing his skin. He approached the pickup, in an old dented vehicle with mud-caked tires. Its driver's door stood slightly ajar. He rested one hand on his holster, the other tightening his flashlight. "Sheriff's Department," he called out. His voice echoed unanswered. The beam of light cut through the cab, empty. On the passenger seat lay a crumpled cigarette pack, the faint smell of smoke still lingering. Mark's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer, scanning the frost-glazed glass. A faint smear like the drag of a hand marred the inside of the window. He keyed the radio again. "Dispatch, vehicles unoccupied. Gonna check the area. Stand by." The reply came delayed, distant. 10-437. He turned toward the tree line. Branches swayed under the weight of snow, shadows bending and snapping in the harsh beam of his flashlight. Something rustled, soft but deliberate, like boots shifting against ice. "Hello?" Mark called. The word hung heavy in the air. Silence, his chest tightened. He glanced back at his cruiser, the red-blue light still rotating, splashing his shadow across the frozen ground. The world felt both wide open and claustrophobic. Every sound was magnified, and every breath was too loud. Another rustle. "This one is closer." Mark's instincts kicked in. He unlatched his holster, his voice firmer now. "Sheriff's Department."
"Step out where I can see you."
No response. Only the groan of trees under winter's weight. He stepped into the tree line, crunching snow beneath his boots, his flashlight beam trembling across the underbrush. The noise came again, but from behind him. He spun, heart hammering, light slicing through empty air. The radio hissed on his shoulder. A voice broke through faintly. "Unit 37, status check." "Do you copy?" Mark reached for the mic, but before he could answer, the sound of movement surged. Fast, deliberate, right behind him. He turned, the radio went silent, minutes passed. The patrol car idled, exhaust billowing into the night sky. Red and blue lights casting restless shadows across the barren fields. The driver's side door remained open, waiting for a deputy who would never return. In the dispatch center, an operator repeated the call, her voice climbing with urgency. "Unit 37, please respond." "Do you copy?" Nothing but static. By dawn, deputies would swarm County Road 12. The cruiser still ran, headlights cutting into the morning mist. But of Mark Lawson, there was no trace. Only an open field, an abandoned truck, and the uneasy silence of a town about to lose more than just a deputy. And so it began, not with a body, not with a witness, but with absence. Dawn broke gray and hollow over Coldwater County. The frost that had glittered in the moonlight now dulled beneath a sky swollen with clouds. County Road 12 was no longer silent. It was alive with the thrum of engines, boots stamping against frozen earth, and the clipped voices of deputies who moved with urgency, but carried confusion in their eyes. The cruiser sat exactly as it had been found, headlights burning weakly against the fog, engine still humming, exhaust puffing rhythmically into the brittle air. The door gaped open like a wound that no one could close. Sheriff Clayton towered over the scene, his broad shoulders wrapped in a heavy coat, jaw clenched tight. He leaned into the radio mounted in his truck. "Unit 37 is still unresponsive. We're escalating to a full search. Get dogs, get choppers. I want eyes on every goddamn inch of this county." A deputy approached cautiously. "Sir, no signs of struggle near the cruiser, just..." Nothing. Nothing is a sign, Clayton snapped, though his voice trembled beneath the gruffness. Fan out. The dogs arrived first, straining at their leashes, noses buried in patches of snow. They caught a scent quickly, pulling handlers toward the tree line where Mark's last footprints trailed off. For a moment, hope sparked. Maybe he was injured, hiding, waiting to be found. But then the trail stopped. Just stopped. The dogs circled wildly, whining, confused. Deputies exchanged uneasy glances. One muttered under his breath, "It's like he vanished into thin air." Helicopters swept overhead, blades chopping the silence into restless fragments. From above, the fields looked endless. Blank sheets of white broken only by the thin line of the highway. Search parties trudged through the snow, their calls echoing into the woods. "Mark! Deputy Ellison! You out here?" No answer came, only the groan of branches bending under winter's weight. Back at the roadside, Laura Ellison arrived, wrapped in a borrowed coat, her hair uncombed, her face pale with sleeplessness. She pushed past a deputy and stumbled toward the cruiser. "Where is he? Where's my husband?" Clayton stepped forward, steadying her. "Laura, we're doing everything we can. He's out there. We'll find him." Her eyes darted to the open door, the empty seat, the radio still crackling faintly with static. She shook her head, disbelief hardening into terror. Nope, no, this isn't right. He wouldn't just walk off. Clayton swallowed, unable to meet her gaze. Hours dragged into the night. The search widened. Volunteers pouring in from neighboring towns, flashlights dotting the dark woods like a constellation of desperate stars. But the forest gave nothing back. No footprints, no scraps of clothing, no blood. By the third day, exhaustion replaced adrenaline. The dogs grew restless. Deputies snapped at one another and rumors began to seep through the cracks. Had Mark been ambushed, taken, or had he walked away from everything he knew? On the fifth day, the official search was scaled back. The cruiser was towed from the roadside, its lights finally extinguished. What remained was an absence too heavy to name, a silence that settled over Coldwater County like a curse. Laura Ellison watched the taillights disappear down the highway. Her hands trembled as she whispered almost to herself, "He's not gone. Someone knows where he is." The words hung in the air like a vow, one that would haunt the town long after the search ended. The official search for Deputy Mark Ellison ended with no answers, only a chilling void. Coldwater County, once a quiet patchwork of farms and churches, found itself splintering under the weight of uncertainty. People whispered in diners, hardware stores, and church pews. Everyone had a theory, and no two stories aligned. At the Rusty Nail Cafe, the hub of small-town gossip, voices dropped whenever Laura entered. She felt their eyes trail her like shadows, sympathy mixed with suspicion. "I'm telling you," one farmer muttered over his coffee. "It was those drug boys by the river. Mark must have stumbled on something he wasn't supposed to see." Across the counter, another shook his head. "Nah, man like Ellison, family man, churchgoer. If he vanished, it was the criminals." It was personal. The word personal carried weight. It hinted at betrayal, secrets, shame. Things people in Coldwater preferred to bury under silence. Sheriff Clayton gave interviews on local radio, his voice stern but unconvincing. "We pursued every lead. My men worked tirelessly. Sometimes the truth doesn't show itself right away, but we will not stop, yet townsfolk noticed the cracks." The sheriff's department grew defensive, deputies snapping at reporters, avoiding questions about the abandoned pickup on County Road 12. No fingerprints, no registration, no owner ever came forward. An empty truck became the ghostly anchor of the town's unease. For Laura, life twisted into something unrecognizable. Nights became interrogation chambers inside her own home. Friends asked questions that felt like accusations. Did Mark seem different before it happened? Was he under stress? Are you sure he wasn't hiding something from you? Each question dug deeper than the last. One evening, her sister sat across from her at the kitchen table, steam curling from untouched mugs of tea. "Laura, people are saying he ran, that maybe he couldn't handle something." Laura's voice broke into a sharp whisper. "Ran where?" "In the middle of the night, leaving his badge, his car, everything he loved." "That's not Mark." Her sister reached for her hand, but Laura pulled away. "If he's gone, someone took him." But the town didn't rally behind her certainty. Instead, lines were divided. Those who believed Mark had been murdered and those who believed he had chosen to disappear. Both versions carried poison. At church, a deacon's prayer slipped into a plea for forgiveness. His words pointed though no name was spoken. In the grocery aisle, a stranger whispered too loudly, "I heard his marriage wasn't what it seemed." The cruelty wasn't always direct. It was in the half-finished sentences, the glances exchanged, the silence that followed her wherever she went. Even the sheriff kept his distance. His weekly check-ins dwindled, his reassurances becoming rehearsed lines. "We're still looking into it, Laura," he said flatly one morning. His eyes, however, slid away too quickly, as if he carried his own secrets. By winter's end, the Ellison house stood like a monument to absence. Mail piled up. The front porch light burned late into the night. Inside, Laura sat by the window staring down the road, waiting for headlights that never came, but what haunted her most wasn't the silence of his absence. It was the suspicion that people she once trusted now believed she knew more than she admitted. And in their eyes, she was no longer just a grieving wife. She was a question mark in her own husband's disappearance. Coldwater County had lost a deputy, but Laura Ellison had lost her world, and the town seemed all too ready to turn against her. 18 months after Mark Ellison's disappearance, Coldwater County no longer spoke of him with urgency, only with resignation. The patrol car had been replaced, new deputies sworn in, and County Road 12 became just another lonely stretch of asphalt. But for Daniel Ellison, the silence was unbearable. Daniel was 6 years younger than Mark, who was once the reckless one in the family. Mark had been the steady brother, the badge, the marriage, the house, the man who seemed untouchable. And then, one night, he vanished. What remained wasn't just grief. It was a riddle, one that Daniel couldn't let go. He quit his job in construction, sold his truck, and scraped together enough to take courses in private investigation. By 1996, while the sheriff's office boxed up Mark's file and moved it to storage, Daniel reopened it in his own apartment, a one-bedroom scattered with photocopied reports, maps, and newspaper clippings. Late at night, he would sit with a tape recorder, replaying Mark's final radio call, pulling over on County Road 12 for a routine check. "White pickup on the shoulder, copy?" Daniel would pause, rewind, and listen again, searching for hesitation, for fear, for anything his brother's steady voice had hidden. Something happened after that call, Daniel muttered to himself. And somebody knows what. He began to knock on doors. Retired deputies, farmers, anyone who had seen or heard something that winter. Most were polite at first, but their patience wore thin. "You think we didn't already answer these questions?" one former officer snapped. "Your brother disappeared. That's it. Sometimes men just disappear." But Daniel refused to accept it. He noted every contradiction, every slip. One deputy swore Mark's cruiser door was closed when he arrived. Another swore it was wide open. A farmer claimed he saw headlights near the tree line before dawn, but that detail never appeared in the reports. It wasn't just inconsistencies. It was omissions. Daniel began to suspect that the investigation had been handled carelessly, maybe even deliberately. Sheriff Clayton's early statements didn't match his later ones. Evidence, like the unregistered pickup, seemed to vanish from official records. One night in 1998, Daniel spread photos across his kitchen table. He stared at them for hours. The pickup, the tree line, the open field. His hands trembled as he whispered, "They buried him. They had to." But who were they? Laura still clung to her belief that Mark had been taken, but she had grown distant from Daniel. Grief had hollowed her, and the constant reopening of wounds was too much. "You think digging this up is helping?" She snapped once, eyes red with exhaustion. "Mark is gone, Daniel. Chasing ghosts won't bring him back." Daniel's reply was quiet but sharp. "It's not ghosts I'm chasing. It's liars." By the early 2000s, his obsession had become his identity. His apartment was no longer a home, just a war room. Pins marked maps, strings connected names, and every unanswered question burned like an accusation. The town had moved on. But Daniel hadn't, he couldn't, because in the hollow spaces of silence, he began to find whispers of something darker, secrets Mark had carried that no one, not even Laura, had been ready to face. And when Daniel pulled on one of those threads, the name that surfaced was a woman neither brother should have known. By 2003, Daniel Ellison's investigation had worn him down to skin and nerves. His hands were calloused from flipping files, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. Yet he pushed forward, convinced that the sheriff's office hadn't just failed his brother. They had buried the truth. The first thread came from a retired dispatcher, an older woman who agreed to meet Daniel in a quiet diner off the interstate. Her hand shook as she stirred her coffee. "You didn't hear it from me," she whispered, leaning closer, "but Mark, he was distracted that winter, talking on the phone more than usual. He wasn't himself." Daniel frowned. "Distracted how?" She lowered her gaze. Like a man with a secret. It was the first time Daniel allowed himself to consider the unthinkable. That Mark, the dutiful husband and deputy, might have been hiding something even from him. Weeks later, Daniel combed through phone records, old bills yellowed with age. A number appeared repeatedly, late nights, long calls. The name attached, Claire Donovan. At first, Daniel didn't believe it. Claire was no stranger in Coldwater. She was a striking woman, 10 years younger than Mark, married once but long divorced. She worked part-time at the county clerk's office and was known, whispered about, for her ties to men in positions of power. Daniel tracked her down, finding her in a small rental on the edge of town. When she opened the door, her face hardened. "I know why you're here," she said flatly before he could speak. "Then say it," Daniel challenged. Her eyes flicked nervously toward the street. Finally, she stepped aside. Inside, the house smelled of cigarettes and stale perfume. She lit one as she spoke, smoke curling around her words. "Mark and we had something. It wasn't supposed to happen. He came to me after shifts, said he couldn't talk to anyone else. He felt trapped." Daniel's chest tightened. Trapped in what? His job, his marriage? Her voice cracked, bitterness leaking through. "Both." He said Laura didn't understand him anymore. He said the badge was killing him. He needed escape. I was that escape. Daniel wanted to shout, to call her a liar. But deep down he knew. The missing pieces in Mark's behavior, the distance Laura had described, all fit too neatly. "Why didn't you come forward when he vanished?" Daniel asked. Claire's eyes glossed with tears. "Because people like Clayton would have destroyed me. Don't you get it?" The sheriff knew. He warned Mark, told him to end it or there'd be consequences. Daniel froze. "Sheriff Clayton?" She nodded. Mark was talking about exposing him, about corruption, payoffs, said he had proof. That night he disappeared. He told me it was time to bring it all out. The word struck Daniel like a hammer. His brother hadn't just been a deputy on patrol, he had been a threat to powerful men. Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. "He was scared, Daniel. He said if anything happened to him, it wouldn't be an accident." The room fell silent. Daniel stared at her, his mind racing, the betrayal cutting deeper than he could bear. His brother hadn't been the hero frozen in memory. He was flawed, desperate, reckless, and now possibly murdered because of it. Leaving her house, Daniel stumbled into the night air, the cold biting at his face. He gripped the steering wheel of his car, shaking. For years he had fought to prove Mark was a victim. Now he wasn't sure if he'd uncovered the truth, or only more lies. At home, he pinned Claire's name onto his wall of evidence, drawing a line to Clayton, another to Laura, and finally to Mark himself. The web was no longer neat. It was tangled, messy, poisoned. For the first time, Daniel felt afraid. Not of failure, but of what might be waiting if he uncovered the whole truth. And then, in the fall of 2012, long after hope had withered, Coldwater County would be shaken again, not by whispers, but by bones. The woods behind County Road 12 had grown wild in the 18 years since Mark Ellison vanished. Saplings had become trees and undergrowth thickened into walls of bramble. Locals rarely went there except during hunting season, when the silence of the forest was broken by rifles and shouts. It was October 2012 when two hunters, brothers, James and Robbie Turner, trudged through that silence in search of deer. The morning air was brittle, their boots crunching over frost. The older brother stopped suddenly, frowning at something half-buried near a moss-covered log. "Robbie," James called, his voice tight. "You seeing this?" At first it looked like nothing more than rusted metal, the kind hunters stumbled across all the time. Scraps of farm equipment, beer cans, junk left to rot. But as James brushed away the soil, the shape became clearer, a star-shaped badge, dulled by years underground. And then, just inches away, Pale fragments surfaced beneath the moss. "Bones," Robbie whispered, stumbling back. Their rifles hung useless in their hands as the truth settled over them like frost. Hours later, the woods swarmed with law enforcement. Deputies cordoned off the site, floodlights casting eerie shadows against the trees. The air smelled of turned soil and gasoline from the generators. A forensics team knelt in the dirt, carefully brushing away layers of earth that had concealed their grim find for nearly 2 decades. The badge was confirmed first. The tarnished nameplate still faintly read, Deputy Mark Ellison. Then came the jacket, shredded, faded, threads clinging to brittle fabric. Patches of bone emerged, fragile and discolored. And near the remains, half hidden in the soil, lay a service revolver with only 5 rounds intact. Sheriff Clayton, older now, stood at the edge of the tape, his face ashen. Reporters pressed in from every angle. "Sheriff, does this confirm foul play? Was Mark Ellison murdered? Why here? Why now?" Clayton's voice was gravelly, controlled. "We won't speculate. The remains will be tested. Until then, this is an active investigation." But his eyes betrayed something else, a flicker of fear or perhaps recognition. For Daniel Ellison, the call came just after midnight. He drove through the night, headlights carving through fog until he reached the site. Standing at the edge of the trees, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. They had found him. After 18 years of searching, his brother was no longer missing. He was bones in the dirt. Daniel clenched his fists, staring at the revolver bagged in evidence. 5 rounds intact, 1 missing. What happened in those woods, Mark? Who were you pointing that gun at? The discovery didn't close the wound. It tore it wider. And when news reached Laura Ellison, her silence was heavier than any scream. The knock on Laura Ellison's door came just after dawn. She had grown used to early mornings in quiet, the house a shell that echoed with absence. But the sight of 2 deputies on her porch jolted her into a past she thought she had learned to survive. "Mrs. Ellison," one began gently, hat clutched in his hands. "We've recovered remains believed to be your husband's." Laura's breath hitched. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the doorframe to steady herself. For 18 years, she had lived between hope and despair. Now, the limbo was gone, replaced with something colder. Finality. At the sheriff's office later that day, she sat in a sterile interview room, hands folded tightly. Daniel arrived, his presence filling the space with restless energy. "They found him," Laura whispered, staring at the table. "All this time, he was there." Daniel nodded, jaw tense. "Not just found. Someone put him there. Someone wanted him to disappear." She looked at him, eyes red. "You think it was murder?" "I know it was." But investigators weren't looking only at Clayton or forgotten suspects. They turned their questions on Laura, pressing into her memories. "Mrs. Ellison, was your husband acting unusually before the disappearance? Did you know about any extramarital relationships? Did you and your husband argue the week he vanished?" Each question struck like a blade. Laura denied what she could, deflected what she couldn't. Her silence on certain points and the distance in their marriage, Mark's late nights, the phone calls she never dared question, became louder than words. Alone afterward, Daniel confronted her. "They think you know more than you're saying." Laura's eyes flashed with anger. "You think that too?" "I think Mark was in over his head. And I think you saw it before anyone else." Her voice trembled. "I saw him change, Daniel. He stopped looking at me the way he used to. He was hiding things and I let him. Because I was afraid that if I pushed, he'd leave. And now," her words broke, "now they all think I killed him with my silence." Daniel reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Her grief had calcified into something harder, a shield against a world that demanded she carry the burden of his choices. Outside the station, reporters shouted questions as she left. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward. "Mrs. Ellison, did you know about your husband's affair? Do you believe he was murdered?" She kept walking, eyes fixed ahead, lips pressed shut. The widow of Deputy Mark Ellison had waited 18 years for answers. Now that they had come, they carried suspicion instead of peace. And Daniel, standing in the shadows, realized the storm was only beginning. Daniel Ellison sat in his truck outside the sheriff's office, watching as Sheriff Clayton strode out into the parking lot. The man carried himself with the same authority he had back in '94, but now it looked heavier, weighed down by years and secrets. His hat brim shadowed his eyes, and when he spoke to deputies, Daniel caught a flicker of tension in his jaw, the kind of tightness that comes from holding something in for too long. The hunter's discovery had rattled everyone, but Clayton seemed almost cornered. He repeated the same lines to reporters, never straying from a script. Active investigation. No speculation. No comment. It was the same tone he'd used the night Mark vanished. Daniel remembered it clearly, Clayton's calm voice telling him they would find Mark soon, while refusing to explain why the cruiser had been left, running with its lights flashing. That memory had gnawed at him for years. Inside, Daniel requested the case file. The clerk hesitated but handed him the thick folder, corners yellowed with time. Daniel flipped through page after page, the statements, the maps, the radio logs. His eyes froze when he saw the timestamp of Mark's final call. 47 p.m., routine traffic stop. Highway 19, 11:53 p.m., silence 11:58 p.m. Cruiser located, lights active, but something was missing. No official record of Clayton's own location that night. No statement placing him anywhere specific. Daniel shut the file, jaw tightening. Later, he cornered Clayton in the lot. "You never told me where you were that night," Daniel said, his voice low. Clayton adjusted his belt, eyes narrowing. "Watch yourself, Ellison. I don't answer to you. You answered Mark. He trusted you, and now his bones are in the dirt." For a moment, Clayton's mask slipped. His nostrils flared, eyes darting. Not with guilt, but with calculation. "You think you're the only one who lost him? I ran this department with him. I bled to find him, then tell me why the case went cold." Silence hung heavy. Then Clayton leaned closer, voice sharp. "Sometimes the truth isn't what families want to hear. Sometimes men make choices that bury them long before a shovel does." Daniel stiffened. "What choices?" But Clayton walked away, boots crunching on gravel, leaving only the echo of words that sounded more like a warning than an explanation. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He replayed Clayton's tone, the way his eyes had shifted when asked about the night of the disappearance. Something was wrong. Something had always been wrong. At 2 a.m, he drove to the woods where the remains had been found. The sheriff's tape still fluttered in the cold wind, a ghostly marker of where Mark had lain hidden for 18 years. Daniel stood at the edge, flashlight beam cutting into the dark. Clayton knows. He's hiding something. Maybe he was there. Maybe he saw what happened. Maybe. The thought hit him like a stone. Maybe he pulled the trigger. But even as rage built, another possibility clawed at his mind. What if Clayton wasn't the killer? What if he was covering for someone else? The silence of the forest offered no answers, only shadows. And Daniel realized that to find the truth, he would have to step into those shadows, even if it meant dragging Clayton down with him. The storm rolled in just after midnight, thunder rattling the old farmhouse where Daniel sat alone with a bottle of whiskey untouched at his side. He wasn't a drinking man, but tonight he thought about it. 18 years of questions had finally narrowed to one truth. Sheriff Clayton was hiding something. But what gnawed at him more was why. His phone buzzed. "Unknown number," he answered, voice rough. "Yeah?" A pause, then a woman's voice trembling. "Daniel, it's me." He froze. "Laura." For weeks she had kept her distance, answering investigators with clipped words, dodging neighbors, letting suspicion harden around her like armor. Now in the middle of the night she was reaching out. "Can you come?" she whispered. I can't carry it anymore." Daniel's pulse quickened. He grabbed his jacket and drove through rain-slicked streets to her house. Laura met him at the door, pale, eyes swollen. She led him into the dim kitchen, where the only light came from a flickering bulb above the sink. She didn't sit. She just stood there, trembling. "I loved him," she blurted. Daniel blinked. "Mark, he was your husband, not Mark." Her voice cracked. "Clayton." The word hit him like a gunshot. Laura pressed her hands to her face, sobbing. "It started before Mark disappeared. I was lonely, Daniel. Mark was distant, working late, always shutting me out. And Clayton." He filled the silence. "He made me feel seen again." Daniel's throat tightened with disgust and disbelief. "You're telling me you were with the man running the investigation?" Tears streamed down her face. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. And when Mark found out," the kitchen seemed to shrink around them. "He knew?" Daniel asked, voice low. Laura nodded. They argued. That night, before his shift. He told me I'd ruined everything. He said he was going to end it. Tell Clayton he'd expose us both. Her hands shook violently. Then he left, and I never saw him again. Daniel gripped the edge of the counter, rage coursing through him. So Mark disappears right after threatening Clayton, and you kept this buried for 18 years? Her silence was the answer. Lightning flashed through the window, illuminating her hollow face. You don't understand, she whispered. If I had told them, they would have blamed me. And maybe they would have been right. I killed him long before whoever buried him did. Daniel stepped back, his chest heaving. Betrayal twisted in his gut. Betrayal of his brother, of truth, of every wasted year searching. You should have told me, he growled. You should have told someone. Laura sank into a chair, broken. Do you think I haven't told myself that every day since? Do you think I sleep? For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm howled outside, rattling the windows. Finally, Daniel leaned closer, voice sharp with resolve. This doesn't end here. Clayton's finished. I'll drag him into the light if I have to tear this county down to do it. Laura looked up at him, fear widening her eyes. If you push him, Daniel, he won't go quietly. You don't know what he's capable of, but Daniel did know. Or at least he was starting to. And as he walked out into the rain, her confession burned in his mind like fire. Clayton hadn't just lost control of the case. He'd lost control of himself, and Mark Ellison had paid the price. The next morning, Daniel drove straight to the sheriff's office. Sleep had eluded him, Laura's confession looping endlessly in his mind. Her words had transformed suspicion into certainty. Clayton wasn't just incompetent. He was complicit. The office buzzed with reporters and deputies juggling phone calls. Daniel ignored them all, his boots echoing through the hallway until he reached the sheriff's door. He didn't knock. He shoved it open. Clayton looked up from behind his desk, calm as ever. Ellison, he muttered, leaning back in his chair. I hope you're here to thank me for the work we're doing. Daniel slammed the door shut. Cut the act. Laura told me everything. A flicker crossed Clayton's face, just enough to confirm the hit. He exhaled slowly, steepling his fingers. She talks too much when she's scared. Don't play coy, Daniel snapped. You were sleeping with my brother's wife. And when Mark found out, he threatened you. Hours later, he disappears. Now his bones are in the dirt. Tell me that's a coincidence. Clayton rose, towering over the desk. His voice was low, dangerous. You don't know what you're saying. I know my brother didn't just walk off into the woods to die, Daniel shot back. I know his revolver was missing one round. And I know you buried this town in silence to protect yourself. Clayton's jaw flexed. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing like a predator. You want truth? Fine. Your brother wasn't a saint. He was unstable, angry. He waved that revolver around and threatened me. Said he'd ruin me, ruin Laura, ruin everything. Things got out of hand. Daniel's chest tightened. So you admit it. You killed him. The sheriff's lips curved into something between a smirk and a grimace. I admit nothing. But accidents happen when men let anger rule them. And sometimes covering it up spares more people than it hurts. Daniel's fist clenched. You spared no one. You left him to rot in the ground. You destroyed Laura, you destroyed me. For the first time, Clayton's mask cracked fully. His eyes glistened with something in regret or rage. You think I haven't carried this every damn day? You think I sleep at night? Mark made his choice. I made mine. And now you want to drag it all into the light? Yes, Daniel said coldly. Because the only thing worse than losing him was knowing his blood was on your hands and you still wore that badge. The door burst open. Deputies stood in the frame, tension thick. Clayton turned to them, voice snapping back into control. Get Ellison out of here, now. They hesitated, glancing between the two men. Daniel's fury was undeniable, but so was the sheriff's fear. As they escorted him out, Daniel locked eyes with Clayton one last time. You can hide behind that badge a little longer, but the truth's coming, and when it does, it'll bury you the way you buried Mark. Outside, Daniel stood on the courthouse steps as reporters swarmed him. Cameras flashed. Mr. Ellison, do you believe the sheriff killed your brother? He didn't flinch. Yes, and I'll prove it. The words rippled through the crowd like fire. For the first time in 18 years, the silence surrounding Mark's disappearance began to crack. And Sheriff Clayton, watching from his office window, knew his world was about to collapse. The courtroom was packed. the air thick with anticipation. Reporters filled every bench, microphones crackled outside the doors, and townspeople leaned forward eager for the spectacle. Sheriff Clayton, the man who had ruled this county for decades, now sat at the defense table, his badge surrendered, his face lined with exhaustion. Daniel Ellison sat in the front row, fists clenched, eyes fixed on the man who had stolen 18 years from him. Laura sat a few rows back, pale and trembling, her presence a silent reminder of the tangled web that had brought them here. The prosecutor's voice cut through the room. Sheriff Clayton, did you have a personal relationship with Laura Ellison before Deputy Mark Ellison's disappearance? Clayton's jaw tightened. Yes. The word was barely audible, but it cracked the silence like thunder. Gasps rippled across the benches. And when Deputy Ellison discovered this relationship, what did he do? Clayton's voice dropped lower. He confronted me, said he'd ruin me, ruin Laura. He pulled his weapon. Daniel's stomach twisted. He had waited years for truth, but hearing it in Clayton's gravelly voice felt like betrayal all over again. And what happened then? The sheriff's mask slipped. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time his voice trembled. We struggled. One shot, just one. I never meant... He swallowed hard. I never meant for him to die. The room fell silent. Daniel's heart pounded. He wanted to scream, to leap across the benches, but all he could do was sit, trembling. The man who had stolen his brother's life had finally spoken the words he had long suspected. The prosecutor pressed on. And afterward? What did you do with Deputy Ellison's body? Clayton's eyes glistened, his voice hoarse. I dragged him into the woods. Buried him shallow. Told myself it was mercy. That if no one knew, the pain would fade. But it never did. Laura's sobs echoed across the courtroom. The jury sat stone-faced, their pens scratching furiously. Daniel closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his lids, he saw his brother's cruiser idling on the roadside, lights flashing into the night. He heard Mark's steady voice on the radio promising to check in again. He never had, because the man he trusted, the sheriff he served under, had silenced him. When Clayton was led away in cuffs, his shoulders slumped, his eyes downcast, the crowd erupted. Some shouted curses, others questions. Daniel stayed seated, unmoving. There was no victory in this. Justice didn't bring Mark back. It didn't erase 18 years of searching or the nights filled with unanswered prayers. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Daniel. Cameras flashed, questions tumbled. Do you feel justice was served? Do you forgive Sheriff Clayton? What do you want people to remember about your brother? Daniel raised his head, voice steady but hollow. Remember that he was a good man who deserved better. And remember that truth always has a price. Sometimes it takes years, decades, but it always comes. The cameras clicked, capturing his grief, his defiance, his hollow triumph. Later that night, Daniel stood alone in the woods where Mark had been found. The tape was gone, the floodlights dismantled. Only the whisper of wind through the trees remained. He knelt at the patch of earth, pressing his palm to the soil. I found him, Mark, he whispered. I found the truth. The forest swallowed his words. And though the case was closed, Daniel knew the silence would never leave him. Because the truth hadn't just buried the sheriff, it had buried them all. In the years that followed Sheriff Clayton's conviction, the town of Brookhaven never looked the same. The courthouse steps, once the backdrop of silence and denial, became a symbol of reckoning. For decades, people had whispered about the night Deputy Mark Ellison disappeared. Now the whispers had names, faces, and truths attached to them. Yet truth, as Daniel had learned, was not a cure. Laura Ellison left town shortly after the trial. Some said she moved north to live with a distant cousin. Others believed she simply vanished into anonymity, carrying the weight of guilt and love that had destroyed her family. To this day, her name is rarely spoken aloud in Brookhaven, as if saying it might reopen wounds too raw to touch. Sheriff Clayton died in prison 5 years into his sentence. Officially, the cause was heart failure. Unofficially, some claimed the guilt had finally finished what time alone could not. His badge remains locked in the evidence vault, made a symbol not of honor but of betrayal, and then there was Daniel. For him, closure was a myth. He became a quiet figure in town, the man who had fought the system, dragged truth into the light, and paid the price of knowing. People offered condolences, but no words could bridge 18 years of searching for a brother who had been only a few miles away all along. On anniversaries, Daniel would visit the woods where the hunters had stumbled upon Mark's shallow grave. The county placed a modest plaque there, etched with his name and years of service. Locals sometimes brought flowers. Daniel brought silence. He would stand beneath the trees listening to the wind, as if waiting for a voice that would never return. The story of Deputy Mark Ellison lives on in documentaries, podcasts, and late-night retellings in roadside diners. For some, it's a cautionary tale about betrayal and power. For others, it's about the persistence of a brother who refused to let silence win. But for those who lived it, the case left scars. It asked questions with no easy answers. How well do we ever truly know the people we love? How far will a person go to protect their secrets? And what does justice really mean when it comes years too late? The woods still stand, quiet and indifferent. Trees grow over the scars in the soil. Animals tread the same paths Mark once patrolled. Nature forgets, but the people of Brookhaven do not. They remember the deputy who vanished, the sheriff who fell, and the truth that took 18 years to claw its way out of the dark. And sometimes, on cold autumn nights when the wind rattles through the branches, they say you can still hear it, the faint crackle of a radio call that never found its reply.